All right. Hi, everyone. You are here for the Shaking Off Stigma live stream. Our Shaking Off Stigma or S.O.S live stream programs bring together people of different generations to talk about issues that are taboo or difficult, and we have candid conversations across generations. So thanks for being here. Tonight, our conversation is called Forging Understanding, One Conversation at a Time. And that is occurring with me, Cait Vaughan, and Elayne Richard. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Cait. I use she and her pronouns. I am the national grassroots organizer for Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights. And I've been in that role almost a year next week. And before that, I worked at an independent abortion care provider and family planning provider based in Maine. And I did policy and culture change work there. And before that, I organized around winning a universal healthcare system on the state level here in Maine under a human rights framework. And so that is a bit of what I bring to this conversation. And I'm going to have Elayne introduce herself now.
Thanks, Cait. I'm Elayne Richard. I use she and her pronouns. I'm 67. I live in Fairfield with my husband. I've got 3 kids, a daughter-in-law, and 2 grandkids. I just real briefly, I started activism before I even got to college. I was working on George McGovern's campaign. That just puts us in a little time context here. And it was a lot about peace and justice and anti-war stuff. Because for me, abortion rights and abortion access was always, it was just a given in my family. I worked at what was then called the Delta Women's Clinic in New Orleans in 1978 and 9. It was an abortion clinic, and I supported women who came in for abortion care. Moving here later, I was a childbirth educator, I was a substitute teacher, I did children's case management, I did a whole bunch of stuff. I've been volunteering with GER for about 4 years. I am the National Education Coordinator. And I think what's really kind of cool about volunteering with GER is that I know my passions are still as strong as ever. They're still the same, but through the activism and working with GERS, I think my eyes are starting to see things in various and at times different kinds of lenses. And it's just kind of cool. That's the kind of growth that I like to keep having. I still believe, though, that conversations with other people, one person at a time, is probably the best way we're going to change things in even times like these. So that's it. I also want to say, Cait, I am really excited that we're doing this tonight. And I'm excited because of the energy that you, especially you, and a lot of younger people bring to this reproductive rights movement. And for me, it's exciting. It's really hopeful. It means that the fight I've been fighting for so long hasn't been in vain. And it also is really educational for me because, to tell you the truth, I never know what I'm going to know that I don't know whenever we get together, because I always learn something. If it's not a fact, it's a way to do it. And that to me is just wicked exciting. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here too. And, you know, working with elders is a really, it feels like a really humbling thing, and then also a really exciting thing for me, like to see folks like GERS in their 60s, 70s, 80s who still want to not only fight and be part of the struggle, but like still want to learn new things and try new things. It just like keeps giving me a fuller sense of like the kind of elder I want to be. So I'm excited about this also on an individual level because you and I have worked together so closely for years. Before I came to GER, we worked together really closely, and I partnered with GER in my other role. And I just feel like we have a really solid friendship, so we can like get into some of the stuff that feels tricky. And we know that at the end of the day, we have a lot of love and respect for each other. So So I want to just provide some context for folks about what brought this conversation into being. So you and I were talking about the recent mass mobilization on October 2nd around abortion justice, all the rallies taking place across the country. There were many, many groups that were working together to organize that, but a lot of people were associating it just with Women's March, but it was Women's March and a bunch of other orgs. And part of what we found out as we were working on rallies here in Maine is we got messaging guidance from the organizers on the national level, and they asked folks to leave coat hanger imagery at home for this event. And that sparked some people being upset. It sparked some people, really, I think responding like in a way that they were upset. And for us, it sparked a conversation about what I got so curious about, like, how can we honor imagery and rhetoric and language that is really meaningful to the history of abortion rights and access as a movement? And how can we also like meet this moment in the best way possible? And so it got me excited about you and I talking, not just about coat hangers, we will talk about that, but like shifting language, shifting tactics, ideas, ways of being in this movement for abortion rights and access, and like what's hard and what's good about all of that. So that's kind of the context of how we came to this conversation.
Yeah. I was going to say too, I do remember the first time you and I did a class riding home, and we rode together. And by the time we got from Farmington to Waterville, my head was exploding with things. I thought I knew a lot of stuff, and I was like, wow. So that's what's keeps. That's why it's still so exciting. But yeah, I recognized I was a little annoyed more than a little annoyed when I heard that we couldn't use a coat hanger image. And my idea of that image was a coat hanger or in a circle with a line going through it, which to me was so self-explanatory of no coat hangers. But I think my guess is that they were talking about a lot, just any kind of coat hanger stuff. And what I knew was that those of us signing on, we had to agree to follow their rules. And it didn't mean, though, that we were in total agreement. So I think I recognize that this is not a stagnant type of movement. And we can't be stagnant, and we can't just be stuck where we were before. But for me, the coat hanger, it's really an emotional, cautionary type of image. And we are in a really emotional time right now for a lot of reasons with what's going on in many states with the Supreme Court. And for me, the coat hanger just reminds me of a few things. And first and foremost, it's never to let my guard down. It is the essence of what can't happen again. And I recognized from talking with you earlier too, that people worried that the coat hanger will play into the hands of the anti-people. It implies that illegal abortions will kill people, that only legal in-clinic abortions are the only safe way. And unfortunately, maybe someone seeing that image will think, oh, if I can't have access, I might have to use a coat hanger. So I really started to think about that. And first, what I know is that clinics are not our only safe option to have abortions. And I might not have said that many years ago. So I think I've really changed and come a long way with that. Because I know now we have medication abortions, we have self-managed abortions. And what I'm starting to really understand is illegal does not mean unsafe. And we knew that way back, like with the Janes and the clergy consultation, because they were doing safe kind of abortions. And now we are facing possibly places where abortions are illegal, and we have ways to do really safe abortions. So what I think, though, for me, this coat hanger, it's just this ugly reminder of what we don't want to ever, ever, ever have to go back to, and the March telling me without a conversation about it that we couldn't use it, to me felt really invalidating. And and about the ugliness of the history that we didn't want to repeat. You know, to me, this is a really urgent fight, and we're facing the possibility of no more Roe. And at first I was like totally devastated, but the more I think about it, I know that there are ways we will get around that because we always have. But this is really urgent. And I think we need to just keep having these conversations so that we just keep moving this forward with that kind of energy. So yeah, I was a little bit ticked. And I'm glad I could get my thoughts now out of that. So there you go.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you sharing like what the coat hanger image like means to you, and what it felt like to be told like that's not welcome or useful in this particular space. And also acknowledging like these rallies were pulled together on really short notice, that you're right, like we don't always agree on everything, but when we participate as a huge group in a movement, like we do have to compromise on some things sometimes. And we agreed to just go ahead and abide by those guidelines, you know, and I think that was the right thing to do. And I'm really glad that we get to have this conversation now outside the frenzy of like planning the rallies.
Right. And you know, it's just to understand where that's coming from. And a lot of times something like this will happen and we just let it go. And it never, nothing ever gets resolved about it. And that's why I think that hurts us more than helps us, you know, because now we're gonna, it's got to be that transparency about why were my feelings hurt? I don't know if my feelings were really hurt. It was just more like they don't get it. And I, you know.
Right. Yeah. And I think this idea, that sentiment of like they, whoever they is, don't get it, is one of the things that keeps us from being like as powerful as we can be. When you feel like, oh, I'm not feeling seen or heard by this other, you know, segment of this group that I'm trying to move in the same direction with. And so for me, it's really like the question became like, how do I honor what that image means, like how it's connected to trauma of entire generations of women and people, really like everyone who lost someone they loved to septic abortions, everyone who, you know, had to live under the fear when they were seeking out an abortion that wasn't legal. I want to be able to honor that. And like for me, when I saw it, I had a totally different reaction when I saw that guidance. I was like, oh, I'm so glad they addressed that. And so like we had totally different reactions, which is why we need to have this conversation. Because my reaction was thinking about, like, I do know how powerful that coat hanger imagery is for so many of the people that you and I work with, right? And for you. And I'm thinking about people who might need an abortion that day, right? Or in the next week or in the next year, people who are particularly young people seeking abortions or will need to seek them soon. What kind of fear might that imagery set off in them, right? Like what, you know, the alternative to me is like, we want to spread as much information as we can about how you can legally access an abortion and also safe ways to manage one's own abortion, even if that is a gray legal area. And so I was thinking like, what's imagery that people can use right now that doesn't come from a fear-based place? So that was like my reaction and totally different than yours.
Right. And I wonder, Cait, if that's because I grew up before Roe and we had to get there to it. And I'm guessing you've grown up with it already here. And it might be just where we started from, you know, where is our starting point in this? And I think it also leads to the bigger conversations of access, because to me that coat hanger is like no access, because if you know, if you have the access, you're not going to need to use these horrible, disgusting ways that are so dangerous. So I think I'm hoping that it leads to the conversations about access, because you know that when I first came to you, that was my whole big thing, that there was less access now than there was when I worked in a clinic, and
Right.
that was pretty scary. So I think I think there are some really bigger issues behind this example. And I think one might be that, you know, our differences are many, but the message is really that same thing. It's really about the access. It's about, I don't even want to keep saying legal, because we'll do it even if it's not legal, but it's access, it's safety. And
Right.
how we get there might be in many different kind of things. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, I think too, it's about the respect of others' differences and the conversations that we have to learn about those differences from other people. So,
Yeah. I mean, I love that you think of the coat hanger as being an image that's about access or lack of access, right? And I that it hasn't been framed in quite that way to me for some reason before, but it makes sense that that is like, okay, this is what people who had no access resorted to in some cases, right? People resorted to all kinds of things.
exactly.
But I think like when we've spoken before, I've said like, I really think our contemporary kind of image is not a coat hanger, but a cell or a courtroom, right? Like I feel like, you know, the people can, because of mifepristone and misoprostol, like people can have medication abortions that they manage on their own very, very safely. And many people do that all over the world every year, including here in the United States. So we know legal doesn't, you know, illegal doesn't mean it's not safe. And so we do have a safe way to do that. And so, but it's physically safe, but it's legally risky. And particularly for people who are already really surveilled and like criminalized, right? Particularly for like Black, brown, poor folks, et cetera. So that, like that, I feel like we have kind of shifted where I'm like the contemporary threat for people is being criminally prosecuted for their pregnancy outcomes.
That, yes, too, but it's, to me, there's still all this access or lack of access. You know, you might be, if you know or have, or you're able to get online to look at where you can order the medications to have your abortion, you can access that. But I think about some kid who's in high school somewhere up in Maine where they don't have broadband internet, which is pretty common these days, getting better, but still common. There's still this lack of access. This is like insane to me. And that, you know, maybe in 50 years, it'll be the line through another image will be just as powerful as that line through a coat hanger of never again, or what we're looking for. I do agree with you too, that we need to be looking at the positive of it and not always the negative of it. I think when the themes become, we're not going back to that, we don't want to go back to that, then that does become negative. So that becomes that image. And I was also surprised at how many people did not follow the little rule and guidelines about not using coat hangers, because there were a lot of coat hangers out there.
Yeah, I think we saw less than we would have.
Yes.
But certainly some people decided to go ahead with that. And maybe they didn't get the guidance also. That's a possibility.
That's,
But it makes me think about like part of what people are worried about. Like I'm thinking about people who need abortions, and some people are worried about what antis, like how can anti-abortion advocates like, you know, pick up what we're putting down and distort it, right? And so I think that might have been some people's fears that like, you know, anti-abortion folks are going to take this and run with it, this idea that medication abortion isn't safe when we know it is safe. But I guess like it makes me wonder like how you think about this idea of like, when do we consider the antis and what they're going to do, and how much do we weigh that? You know, like I'm curious about like your experience with that in your life and in your work of like, how much do you consider the opposition and how much do you weigh that in? It all feels so specific to the context you're in, you know?
Yeah, and the antis, I don't know why they are so proactive, you know, and I feel like I'm always in a movement that is reacting to what I'm not for, you know, as opposed to we are going on the offensive and this is how it has to be and this is what we want. I don't think in my own actions I really consider too much of what they're saying. I think because when I try to have conversations with people who don't agree with me, I'm trying to find those common threads that we might have, as small as they might be. So I'm focusing more on the positive of that as opposed to what are they going to do. But boy, oh boy, you're right. If we don't start opening our eyes to what they do, we lose. You know, the antis always seem one step ahead of us, one word ahead of us. You know, they chose pro-life, and I read that that's why we chose pro-choice, because they wanted it to be like equal syllables to that kind of thing. I mean, we don't need to use their language. They might want to steal ours, but we should have our own, and we should use that. You know, we don't have to fall into that trap.
Well, and I think around like language, like I was really excited about these rallies in October because I felt like there's really been this shift. You know, my body, my choice is like a phrase we still hear a lot, but I loved the like language of bands off our bodies. Like it's much more collective. And I think that language is reflective of like, well, like if I'm being hopeful, I think that language is reflective of like wanting to take a more collective view, wanting to take a systemic look at abortion access and not just thinking about me individually, how do I get the care I need, but like, how do we create systems where everyone can get the care we all need? And that is really like a testament to the work of like reproductive justice advocates and how I think, you know, Black and brown folks have really like reshaped the conversation that we're having on a mainstream level around even abortion, right? Like even when we talk about abortion, there is a way to talk about it that acknowledges systemic problems, right? Like oppression. And so I loved that language, bands off our bodies instead of my body, my choice. Like it feels so much more powerful. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you have identified with language around this issue over time. Like, was there a time where you identified as pro-choice, and do you identify with that term now? Like, how has it changed when you think about your relationship to like supporting abortion rights and access?
Right. So when I first started all this, it was pro-choice. You know, you had a choice. So, but now I also realize sometimes you don't have a choice. You know, and I go back, it's just so boring, but I go back to the access. If you don't have access, you don't have a choice. And I think the older I got, which is a really silly phrase, I think, in my age, but the more I started working like with this, it wasn't so much pro-choice. It was like, I am pro-abortion. And that was something that really, I was like, yes, that's really what I mean. I am really pro-abortion. It's not the choice of this or that, it's abortion. I think what I find exciting now and working with people who are younger than I am, who for me are some of the real leaders in this whole movement, is the language is changing. You know, we learned that you don't just say abortion, these are abortions because people have many. And they don't have to be rare, they just have to be. And these are just language shifts. And I think we have to really pay attention to that, because language and the shifts that they take us in can be really powerful to any movement. You know, I'm going to guess for you, it's frustrating to come around people like myself and we're still talking about pro-choice and you know.
No, I mean, I think as an organizer, like I am always, like you said, I know that you like to have conversations one-to-one and you find them very powerful and you're really good at them. And that's because, I mean, honestly, I just think you're a natural organizer. And so like, as an organizer, I am trying to do the same thing. So when someone says I'm pro-choice, my first thought is not, oh, well, they're not pro-abortion. And, I'm actually like, oh, good. Then they support abortion. They see why it's important. That is a starting place, right? And so I think as an organizer, like when I'm encountering individuals or groups of people, like I try to model the language I think is most powerful, but I also don't want to be constantly like correcting other people's language. If I'm writing a statement, that's a time to get real nitpicky about language, right? But in conversations with folks, I'm trying to build a connection, right? And the connection is, yeah, we believe at the heart of this, we believe abortion is important. And we can work on coming to a shared understanding of like, why does pro-choice not land as the same way now as it maybe did for some people before, right? And so, and definitely there were people who were pro-abortion and identified that way, who were calling for abortion on demand, like for many, many years. This is not a new thing. I think it's just more mainstream now to say I'm pro-abortion.
And we're louder about it. And there's not as much stigma to say that as there was probably many years ago. And I think of the language, and it is really powerful. And one thing that sticks out to me is when we started learning or talking about, we can say people have abortion. We don't have to say women have abortions. And I've tried to put that into some of my educational talks that we do. And that starts conversations because people are like, wait, did you say people or did you mean women? And then we broaden out into these conversations. So these words are really important. And I think older women who are activists are willing to learn all that and want to learn it. We sometimes don't know that it's out there to learn, that's what we need. We as GERS, we think we need to be we know we need to be educating others about what things were like in the past, but we need to be educating ourselves as well, because otherwise we won't be able to relate to people we want to talk with.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's it. What you're talking about is like, we need this learning to be mutual and bi-directional, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I want to be learning from elders. And I also want to, I just hope that people assume that they can also learn from people who are younger than them. And certainly I know you feel that way, and we're always learning from each other, which is such a dynamic process. But it's not true every space that I go into with older women that they assume I have something to offer, right? Like sometimes I've encountered people being dismissive of, particularly around language changes, right? And so I'm curious, like, how does it feel? I guess, like, how does it feel? Have you run into folks who are like your peers, age group, who are struggling with this language shift? And like, what are you hearing is at the heart of that struggle for them? Because I want to understand that more.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is a time my husband and I went out to dinner with some friends, and we were talking about what I did with GER and about abortions. And one of the people with us was like, well, I agree with abortion up to a certain point, and that conversation. And when I pointed out that if you say you agree, you support abortion rights, then why would you put that limit on it? So it's that I think people just need to have their eyes open or to another point of view and understand that. And sometimes it takes more than one conversation with people like that, but they start thinking about it. And I'm not really out for people who are so different than I am to change their minds. I just want conversations to continue to happen. And I think at first when you bring something that we haven't thought of, like I think about like racism, you know, I never thought of myself as a racist until we started really talking about it and understanding my space in that and my privilege around that. But it's, you have to go into these conversations with your eyes open and your heart open, because if it's not, you, why bother with that? I mean, we will have that conversation, but you might have to go home and think about it. You might have to experience something else, and then you start seeing it differently. And like I said earlier, I see things now through different lenses, and I think about it more, and I think I'm able to now think deeper because I've been asked to think deeper. And I think that that's what I'm hoping to do with people, my peers, even people that are younger than I am, people who are older than I am. Because I think in this movement, I see 3 generations. I mean, even especially, you know, in GER, we have people who are who could be my mom. We have me, and then we have people who I can be their mom, you know, so yeah.
Well, and I guess, yeah, I think there's a problem just in our culture in general, broadly, of people feeling that they need to be right in order to show up, right? Or they need to have the right answers, or that I do, like, language is so important. Language is incredibly important. And language is a tool, right? It is, or it's a medium. And if you don't understand all of the context of that language you're using, it doesn't mean that you don't want to be a part of moving forward, right? And so I do think there's something about organizing culture that I found that is like people wanting to be right instead of wanting to be present, and like you said, open to learning and recognizing that it's bigger than just me, right? And so what I see sometimes is that with older folks that I work with is feeling like, oh, I don't think this person is trying to be transphobic, for example, you know, hateful towards transgender folks, right? And for anyone listening who doesn't know, transgender simply means that someone identifies with a gender that is different than the one they were assigned at birth. And cisgender is someone who identifies with the gender they were assigned at birth. So, and that's part of why I define things when I use them, because I don't want to assume everyone knows what I mean. And so sometimes when I see people who are stumbling over, for example, pronouns, like when we introduce ourselves, it's more and more common to introduce oneself with pronouns. But I've definitely been in circles where people said, I don't know what that means. And I sense in that moment of vulnerability, like they feel stupid. They feel suddenly like I'm an outsider because I don't know the lingo. And so I think there are moments where we can pause and say, oh, no big deal, here's what it is. And really have to create cultures where people don't feel afraid of learning. But I also think it's important to note that, like, even people my age and younger, we're learning new terms all the time too. Like when I was in college, there was very different sets of terms around gender that were in currency, that those terms aren't okay anymore. Like just in the past, 15 years, I've had to learn a whole bunch of new language. And so if we can just create organizing cultures where it's okay to learn together, and it's okay to like apologize and learn how to be humble enough to say, oh, I'm sorry. I will do differently next time. Right.
Yeah. And even to ask, what does that mean? And not feel embarrassed. So I think when we come upon people and we have these conversations, if we're leading that discussion, we have to be really careful not to be judgmental of the person who's asking that question. Like, oh my God, I can't believe that person didn't know that. We have to, it's hard. It's hard to, I mean, we talk the right talk, but do we walk that talk? You know,
Right.
and that to me is, for myself, I'm always trying that self-reflection of, am I being the person I say we should all be? You know, and
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that is very different. Like someone not knowing, like genuine lack of knowledge about how to talk about something or that something is an issue to begin with is really different than we definitely do see some people in the abortion rights movement who are stuck on this idea that um, only women get pregnant. You know, they're really persistent with that, even though that is simply not true. So when someone, it's like, if you know better, do better, right?
right,
But if you know better and you refuse to do better, that is when we actually we're like diverging in our values. But with people I'm trying to get to know, I'm trying to figure out, like, is this a difference in like language and understanding, or is this a difference in values, right? And that determines whether I want to part ways with you or not,
right.
right?
Exactly. I'm thinking that people who are, especially someone maybe, I don't want to say especially, but people my age and older who are still in with this, we don't want to part ways. We've been in this too long. And there's so much to learn. I mean, even about how we get together nowadays because we can't get together, you know? So it's just, I come back to being non-judgmental from both sides, understanding that some people's starting points are a lot either further ahead or further behind where we might be. And it's just, I'm not a patient person, Cait, and I'm sure you can see that at times, but you have to try to be patient with people, and that's hard, you know, and you have
Yeah.
to keep that door open so that we can go back and have that conversation again. And I think people are starting to realize that we have to just keep talking. And using the language and not let people stealing our language and twisting it to mean things that it's not supposed to mean.
Yeah. And I mean, I had this question about like, what do we need to have better conversations? But I think you just, took us there and nailed that. Like, we need more, lack of judgment, more like actually welcoming, creating a space like really clearly where it's okay to flag, I don't know what that means, like, and ask questions, and also that it's okay to be wrong and then apologize and keep moving.
And it's okay to disagree.
And it's okay to disagree, which I think is really crucial to organizing, I think. And I'm looking at the time and seeing, like, I think it's a good idea for us. I want to shift to this sort of like closing or wrapping up kind of discussion about, why do you think a multi-generational movement for abortion rights and for abortion justice is so essential? Like, what is important about us building a multi-generational movement? Why does it matter?
Well, because to me, if we didn't, we're going to lose some institutional knowledge if we didn't work intergenerationally. I mean, that to me is first and foremost. It's also a way not to repeat things that shouldn't be repeated. But we also need the energy that younger generations bring to this. And we need to see that this is a fight that you need everybody. It's not yours, it's not mine, it's not hers, it's not theirs. This is all of ours. And if we can't come together and work multi-generationally, then how are we going to convince people who don't agree with us to come along with us? You know, we have to be able to
Yeah.
bring all of us together. It's silly not to. And I think we can't be afraid to reach across the generations and say, I need your help, or what do you think? And I'll talk language, and I'm trying to learn the new language, and I want you to understand where I'm coming from. And then we are stronger to be able to move forward. We are stronger. And I'm sure that you have thoughts about organizing older people, like, you know, we're
I
different.
mean, yeah, and I mean, what I'm really trying to do is that I do believe we need multi-generational movements for abortion justice, reproductive justice, to end racism and poverty and all these things. Like, and part of that is one, just like numbers, flat out, the scale is we need as many of us as possible. But really, for me, more, it's like, for me, I'm not a young person, but I am younger than a lot of people, right? You know, I'm 35, so I'm getting near the
You have
middle.
an old soul. You have that old soul.
But like, so there are certainly people younger than me that I'm also having to learn things from because I'm older than them. But when I'm working with women who are, you know, 20, 30, 40 years older than me, I am reminded all of the time that I am just one person in this stream of history and struggle, and that I inherit what people did before me. And then my job is to pick it up and move it forward, and someone else will inherit. And so there's something, I think, to win in organizing, we have to ultimately stay humble. Even we have to believe we can win, and we have to also stay humble. And part of staying humble for me is realizing, like, I didn't invent being angry about this. I didn't invent the struggle. I inherit it. I do my part. And then it continues after me. Right. And so I think that is one of the really beautiful things that happens when you work across generation is like, and when I want to give up, I look at women who are older than me and say, well, they're still freaking doing this. And so what right do I have to give up? You know, and it really keeps me going. And it's also that I do believe that history and stories are important and they connect us. And I want to be connected to that history. And that means I have to listen to y'all.
Right? And one day people will be listening to your story too. And I hope we don't have to be fighting the same fight, but we will be fighting something. And
Right.
and you know, it's just like on that on the conveyor belt, and people are all we're here, we're off, there are people behind us coming behind us,
Right.
and it's just, we're not isolated people. We are people who
Right.
are a culture and a society, and we're, you know, we are all in this together. And even if we don't all agree with things, we all pretty much, I think, when it comes right down to it, at the end of the day, really want a lot of the same things. And when we can find those and understand that, we're all going to be better off for it. So,
Right. Well, and I want to pull out this comment from someone on Facebook, Judy Carl, said, everyone's stage in life is valuable. Those who have most of their lives out in front of them and those who have lived experience to share. They can learn from each other. And I think that's a really good way to put it. And I also think that people of a certain age, particularly women, I feel that our culture says you age out of being relevant, right? And out of being powerful. And so much of that is determined by our reproductive capacity, right? And so
yes.
part of being multi-generational in this movement also means totally rejecting this idea that you age out of your power, that you age out of relevancy. And so, like, I hope to be an elder that people want to hear from one day. I hope that I don't reach a certain age and people don't care anymore what I think. And that's part of, well, then I want to treat my elders right now with that kind of reverence. And I also want to be listened to at the same time.
I think that's what I love about GER. And I've often said I found my people when I found GER, because there are too many places where it's like, oh, poo-poo, you're done. You know, oh, you hit Social Security, poo-poo, you're retired. Well, I am not retired. I have a lot left to do. And this is where I happened to land, because that passion was still there. And, you know, there are a lot of other cultures, Cait, that revere their elders, and we don't always do that in this culture. And that's too bad, because there is a lot left. But we as elders have to also understand and respect and revere those who are younger than us too, because it is, like Judy says, it's both ways.
Yeah. Well, and I will say, to close this off, speaking of honoring our elders. As you know, I lost a dear friend this week who was an elder of mine. And I just have to say that experiencing the love and care of older women has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. And I have been so blessed with older women who have chosen to love and respect me and build friendships with me. And it is just such a nurturing force, and nurturing is power. And I think that's the thing that is discounted by misogyny, whatever, but it's the truth. And so I just want to lift that up, that I'm really glad we could have this conversation.
If we were in person, I'd do it. My grandmother did and did this and give you a little.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like if we were in person, we would hug, and so I just I'm super grateful that we have this relationship and we can be honest with each other and push on each other, and we just keep struggling and moving through. And I think we're better for it. I am. So
I totally agree, and I know that as silly as it might sound, it just you keep your brain stimulated, you keep growing, you keep learning, and it just gives you hope and life and excitement, and that's what living is all about. So I thank you for your friendship too, and everything I've learned from you, because I'm telling you, it's unbelievable.
Well, I'm also constantly learning, and really, really grateful. So we're going to close out this live stream, but we will be back soon with more conversations, and we hope folks will join us. Thanks, Elayne.
Great.